and welcome to Mind Body Peak Performance with your host, Nick Urban. It's great to have you here today for our conversation on nutrition, and specifically animal-based nutrition and some of the myths and misconceptions of eating in that way. And of course, I recommend tuning into your body and following a diet that works for you. But for a lot of people, they find that eating more meat works really well in their system. And so to discuss all things animal-based and also whole foods supplementation, I brought along Autumn Smith of Paleovalley and Wild Pastures. Autumn suffered from debilitating digestive issues and crippling anxiety for most of her life. Specialists told her that nothing could be done and she was just about ready to give up. Once she harvested the power of whole foods, that all changed, which led her to found Paleovalley in 2013 with her husband, Chaz. And at the time, Paleovalley was one of the rare companies that created whole foods-based products and nutrition and snacks. They created it for themselves, but the market quickly responded and showed them that there's a lot of interest in this style of nutrition. So in 2018, they founded Wild Pastures, which is a company that is bringing the highest quality grass-fed, grass-finished, wild-caught, pasture-raised meat and seafood to consumers. I've been using Wild Pastures and Paleovalley for several years and have been very impressed. If you want to check out either of the companies, you can find them in the links and the discounts at mindbodypeak.com/ and then the number of this episode. So /109. I also wrote a review of my experience with Wild Pastures and how their prices for things like ground beef, for the highest quality ground beef, actually rival what I can find in supermarkets like Trader Joe's or even Whole Foods. But the quality is certainly a couple of notches above what I can find in my local grocers. And every time I run out, I quickly realize this fact. A little more about Autumn before we dive into this one. She has a Master's of Science in Holistic Nutrition. She is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. She's a certified eating psychology coach. She's a fitness trainer for the Tracy Anderson method and a doctoral candidate. Remember, however you choose to eat is up to you. There are pros and cons to each and every single way of eating. And the smart approach is to find what works and to add in any nutrients you may not be getting from your typical eating patterns. With that out of the way, sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Autumn Smith. Autumn Smith, it is a pleasure to finally be chatting with you on the Mind Body Peak Performance podcast.
Yes, Nick, it's so great to be here. It took us a few tries, but I'm glad we made it happen, and it's always a pleasure to see you.
Yeah. So let's start off today with the unusuals or non-negotiables you've done for your health, your performance, and your bioharmony.
Now, is this today or just all of my life?
Today, unless it's a bad example. And if you have a better example, you can go on that day instead.
Okay. Well, it depends on who your audience is, but I would say, I'm always eating organ meats and bone broth. Nose to tail eating is really important to me. I get morning sunshine. I do red light therapy. I'm always in a sauna every day. And I've done coffee enemas in the past, though it is not a daily practice. But that is probably the most unconventional tool I'm using recently.
Yeah, I've used all those, and coffee enema is certainly the least conventional, and it has its time and place. Probably not good for everyday use, but in certain circumstances.
Yes, definitely.
So you've nicely foreshadowed what we will be talking about today, and that is nose to tail nutrition, holistic nutrition, whole foods supplementation, and that.
Yeah, I'm excited. These are important issues I think a lot of people just aren't doing today that I think can help a lot. So really excited.
Exactly. Well, let's begin this with a controversial fact or stat or figure you have around regenerative agriculture or any of those topics.
Ooh, okay. Here's an unconventional fact that it is grasslands that ruminants graze on that have the greatest potential for carbon sequestration. Soil holds 3 times the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and 5 times the amount in forests. And so we often think planting trees is a solution, and it is. But when it comes to the capabilities and the potential compared to grasslands, it isn't quite as productive, especially when you're using really highly managed regenerative practices, which we'll probably get to talking about.
That is certainly the controversial take. And I want to dig into your background a bit and figure out how you got involved in all of this, because this is something that a lot of people are very passionate about on both ends of the spectrum, from completely plant based to completely animal based carnivore. So, how did you get involved in the whole world of nutrition?
Yeah, you know what? I was really sick as a child with digestive issues since the age of about 9 or 10. And no doctor in my small town, Montana, knew what to do with me. They just told me I had irritable bowel syndrome, which we know is like a wastebasket diagnosis. And so I kind of went about life trying Gas X, having it not work for me. And eventually it kind of manifested in mental health issues as well, and anxiety, depression, and eating disorder. I was just kind of a physical and mental mess. And I learned that there was probably nothing anyone could do for me. And so I just started to manage my physical and emotional pain with substances, alcohol, cigarettes, anything I could get my hands on. I was suspended. I got kicked out of my parents' house before I graduated high school. And so I was really struggling, and I still got things done, became a celebrity fitness trainer, finished college, did some professional dancing. But when my husband kind of like got close enough to me, he noticed that I was really suffering, that I was smiling through it all and doing things, being productive, but still really struggling. And so when we got married and he got that firsthand account, he got on the internet and found that some people were having luck with paleo diet, just basically eliminating processed foods, coming to whole foods. And so we did that. And it was a remarkable physical and mental transformation for me, so much so that I wanted to quit all the other jobs I'd had before, which I was very passionate about, and go get a master's and a doctorate and figure out all of this nutritional wellness piece. And then we created our companies because I felt like the biggest barrier to people being able to maintain a lifestyle like this was having the tools, having really high quality products. And so I am an advocate for whole food, and just using food and diet as a tool. Could be carnivore for some. It can be paleo for some. It can be keto for some. Some people go plant-based and it works really well for them. From my research, there's risks associated with that, but I know for specific periods of time, that can also be helpful. So yeah, my goal is just to help people understand how powerful diet can be and how important it is that you find what works for you rather than listening to other people tell you what works for them.
Mm. Based on what you just shared about your own story, it seems like you'd actually be in the camp that's less likely to pursue this, because usually the people who grow up with intense sensitivities and inabilities to handle certain foods, they become aware of the importance very early on. Like, if I eat this, I have a bad day or bad 4 days afterward. But if you're getting by, it seems from the outside that you're crushing it in all different regards. Then until something else happens, you're less likely to pay attention to this world and just more likely to continue going about the way you were doing things.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, I was crushing it or just doing things, but when I was accountable to someone else and they said, no, 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 like you being so bloated that you have to cancel your social plans, like that's not a normal thing. Or well, you collapse and you have anxiety and your mood changes rapidly throughout the day. And that all of a sudden affected someone else. I became accountable, and I had to really sit with myself and say, whoa, I'm contributing to some of this kind of chaos in my life. And I don't want that. I choose not to do that anymore. And so it really was in an effort to take care of someone else that I finally started to listen, which is sad, but is true.
Well, that's also the way it often goes. It's the people around us that reflect back, oh, yeah, you experiencing this and that every day after every meal, that 2 p.m. intense fatigue that makes you want to curl up and take a nap every single day. That doesn't actually have to be that way. That's not necessarily natural. And if you change some things, maybe you won't experience it.
Yeah, and it's funny because no one, when I had digestive issues at that time, was thinking that diet was impacting it. The doctors I went to, it was a stress related condition. I remember them showing me how my colon went. It was like it was contracting like this, rather than the normal. But so it just wasn't there for at least the doctors that I saw. And then also, we had seen so many doctors and so many psychiatrists. You know what I mean? We had been trying so far. I think there's a little bit of hope in the beginning. And then after a long period of time, you start to kind of lose that. So I think I had lost that. It's something that my husband helped put back in the equation for me.
Yeah. One thing that a lot of successful dietary patterns have in common is certain core fundamental principles. And when I look at a bunch of the different people who are successful, they tend to prioritize something that happens before the food in the plate, and that is the soil. It seems whether you're a carnivore, the soil matters, or if you're completely plant based, obviously the soil matters in terms of nutrients and microRNA and all kinds of other stuff. What is your take on the importance of soil for human health?
You guys, I mean, it's so important. Like, our health is the same as the health of the soil, right? We cannot separate it. We have to remember, just as Fred Provenza said, it's one of my favorite quotes. We have to remember we are members of nature's communities. What we do to them, we do to ourselves. And only by restoring them can we inevitably restore ourselves. Now, the soil, not super sexy, but it is like 98.7% of our calories, the food we eat, comes from the soil. Now, the soil's ability to activate and get those nutrients depends on the biology within the soil. But just if we're talking about soil, it's our calories. It holds water, right? It holds carbon. With so much of the carbon that is in the atmosphere, I mean, a lot of it's fossil fuels, obviously, but through agricultural practices, we've also released a lot of the carbon into the soil. Or I'm sorry, into the atmosphere that should be in the soil. Also, a lot of our antimicrobials, our antibiotics, our medicines, they come from the soil. And so if we destroy that very thin top layer, we're in for a very, very rude awakening. It is connected to so many of the things that actually help us sustain our lives, and especially when it comes to a really vibrant life. But it's food and agriculture and health are all one thing. And so I think the most important question when we're deciding what to eat and whether that supports our health or the planet is, what are the practices doing to the soil?
Yeah, and I think if you look at the nutrient density of plants grown in healthy soil versus like hydroponics or something where they just pump in NPK, like the fertilizer, commercial fertilizers, you're going to see very different nutrient levels and micronutrient levels. And it just, you're not going to be as satiated from eating. There's all kinds of other problems associated with it. But the catch is that the fruit, the vegetables, they look beautiful. They look beautiful. So it's the discrepancy between like what you're seeing and what you're actually getting.
Yeah, it's we've been really focused on prioritizing yield, right? We want big plants and we want a lot of them. And we've been kind of stuck in the macros, proteins, carbohydrates, they're all there, right? But what about those micronutrients, the iron and the zinc and that require photosynthesis and the feeding of carbon? Dr. David Thompson did some research and showed from 1940 to 1990, the nutrient content of our soil is declining rapidly. Zinc's 50% in meat and 50% less in vegetables. And it's estimated we need 2 times the amount of meat, 3 times the amount of fruit, and 4 to 5 times the amount of vegetables just to get the nutrients from the food that our grandparents ate. And like you said, hydroponic, if we're adding chemical fertilizers rather than animals, right, which provide tons of microorganisms and other nutrients and diverse arrays of animals, right, in the optimal setting, who all provide different amounts of nutrients, right? That is a very, very different scenario. And we haven't always been measuring that, right? We haven't always been aware of the biology in the soil. I've talked to people who have gone to school for agriculture. They say, we learned about chemistry. We learned about adding NPK. We were totally ignorant of the biology. And this is a very recent thing we're learning. So obviously we're not demonizing people, but yeah, we need to pay attention to the biology in the soil because that's ultimately creating the healthfulness or lack thereof of the food we're eating.
And I've even seen some research that shows that conventionally raised food or conventional food in general tends to be less satiating. And so those that follow an organic diet, although it's a little more expensive, they eat fewer calories, and at the same time, they're getting higher nutrient density.
Yeah. And you know what? My friend, do you know Dr. Fred Provenza?
Mm-mm.
Oh my goodness. Okay, Dr. Fred Provenza and Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, they're doing a lot of this research in what's called metabolomics. So before, when we would analyze a food, probably a handful of nutrients, take a look, okay, are they there or are they not? Now, metabolomics is a new type of analysis where you can literally look at the hundreds of compounds in a food, because there are hundreds of compounds in a food. We label 13 of them, but there are hundreds. And one that they've seen changes a lot, and this specifically pertains to meat products, is the phytonutrients. Now, phytonutrients are not considered essential nutrients, but we know they reduce inflammation. They are anti-diabetic. They have neuroprotective properties. They're just so many different properties. One of them is satiety. Dr. Fred Provenza has a theory that it is the presence of these phytonutrients that are particularly prevalent when you're dealing with healthful soils, diverse pastures, like a lot of different living organisms and a lot of different kinds of plants. It seems like these scenarios have the highest amount of these phytonutrients. And he believes it is those phytonutrients that are letting us know that we've had enough. It's kind of like the way animals regulate their appetite. He wrote an entire book on it called Nourishment in the Wild. It's these phytonutrients to say, okay, you've got enough, you've had enough. Now, when we don't have those because we're doing other types of agriculture or trying to work with monocultures and chemical inputs, I think that's absolutely 100% accurate, that we're just probably going to eat more and we're not going to get those same signals.
Yeah, I mean, this is shifting away from the conventional view of calories and macros reigning king and queen, and then everything else is like an afterthought. It's like flipping that on its head and looking at the micros first, and then maybe not first, but alongside everything else.
Yes, it's all really important. It's just like antibiotics are super important, but we didn't understand the microbiome. And so, just like understanding there are costs and this destruction of the biology and this creation of monocultures that works against nature, there's costs associated with that.
Well, Autumn, what do you think is the reason that the science behind nutrition appears so confusing for the layperson who isn't actually studying this and doesn't know how to distinguish the credibility of one article, one headline against another? And there's a little bit of my own take as to why, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, my take is that there are so many influences, voices in this messaging that people just aren't aware of. So, for instance, we have the American Heart Association. 1961, came out and kind of talked about fats and specifically, animal fats. We should be reducing fat and we should be eating Crisco. So what happened there? The backstory of that is that William Procter and James Gamble, William Procter, yep, James Gamble. They were entrepreneurs who had a surplus of cottonseed oil, and it was originally used to kind of lubricate machinery. But all of a sudden, with the advent of a process called hydrogenation, which makes a liquid fat solid, they thought, wow, this is a really great marketing opportunity to create a fat that they convinced the American public was healthier, cleaner, though none of those things were true. And actually, we know trans fat, which was originally 50% of Crisco, kills hundreds of thousands of people every year due to heart disease. Then we have someone, like Ansel Keys. He created research that made it look like the more saturated fat in the later stages of his research, that we were consuming, the more heart disease. And we now know that wasn't as clear a correlation as we thought it was. And actually, a piece of research just came out that saturated fats from animal sources were inversely correlated to our chronic disease rates, because beef consumption is down and these vegetable oils are way up. And then we have religious influences, right? So we have, I don't know if you've ever heard of Belinda and Dr. Gary Fettke.
I have.
Yeah. Okay. So their story is he was an orthopedic surgeon, and he recommended that his patients cut down on the sugar they were consuming because he was growing concerned that he was amputating limbs. And he, a dietitian, turned him in for this dangerous advice. And then he went through years of litigation and ultimately exonerated. But he was able to peel back the curtain on where a lot of this anti-meat and anti-animal fat was coming from. It was religious sources like Kellogg, the creator of cornflakes, was a Seventh-day Adventist who was taught to believe that the Garden of Eden diet did not include animal products. And so he created these alternatives like flaked corn and wheat that could help prevent lustful desires in children. And so we also have environmental activists, right, in the mix here, and animal rights activists. And it just seems like everybody's kind of got their own biases that they bring to the table when it comes to this research. And we have the American Heart Association, which Crisco gave a lot of money to when it got started. So it kind of is a little bit in bed with that. And then we have people who, with religious beliefs, who sincerely believe that animal products are detrimental or aren't part of a cleaner diet. And then we have entrepreneurs, so these people, unfortunately, make up dietary guidelines committees. I think a recent report showed, something like 7 out of 10 people on the committees have ties in one way or another to some sort of food industry. And sometimes we have Seventh-day Adventist members present as well. And I think, there's nothing to say that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with these people. It's just we have a cacophony of different viewpoints and biases that all come together and do create really confusing guidelines, especially when you consider the evolutionary context that animal products, we've been consuming them for 2 million years, right? And these highly processed fats that they're advocating for. And I don't think they're advocating for highly processed foods, but grains, they're a relatively recent development in human evolution. And so the dietary guidelines run counter to evolutionary evidence. They have a lot of unknown biases. And so I think that's why most people are genuinely confused, because these are good people, these are smart people, but they still have their biases. And what I think is important is to look at how did we evolve and what works for you, even beyond that. And just remember that these are guidelines. They've never been tested empirically, right? The dietary guidelines were never tested. And so we have to take it with a grain of salt. I sincerely believe these people, are trying to do their best, but I think they're conflicted and they receive money and funding that makes a really clear evaluation very, very difficult.
Yes. I know when I was first looking into the difference between conventional food and organics, I was really confused. There's some research out there that shows that organics is better. There's some out there that shows it's the exact same in terms of both nutrient content and then also toxicity and contaminants and things that shouldn't be there. And I was like scratching my head trying to think, how can there be like no consensus, like two totally different camps? And then I realized if you look at the funding of the different studies and you figure out who's behind it and you start to segregate the two camps by that and other factors, such as was it actually true organic food or was it a spin-off created by one of the or purchased by one of these companies, an organic certifier that used to be high quality organic that then all of a sudden became owned by a large food company that just skated by and used that to compare their products against. And all of a sudden, what the picture that emerged is more like the whole merchants of doubt playbook, where all you have to do is introduce a little bit of conflicting information and it overwhelms the public. And then all of a sudden, no one can tell what's actually true. So they just go back to their way of living.
Yes. I know. I think it's really sad. These companies are so powerful, right? These pesticide and fertilizer companies. And you're right. They can produce their own research. And there is research to suggest that some of the nutrient levels are similar. When you look closely, I actually wrote a paper on this. The secondary metabolites, the phytonutrients, like we talked about, and the antioxidants, there's a lot of research to suggest those definitely have there's more of those in organic production. The other thing you have to worry about, like you said, is not all organic soil, organic food is grown, the same way. So there's still bad actors there. There's still, people who really tend to their soil and, have all of the elements, the manure and the compost. And it's just a higher quality, healthier level of soil than in other organic scenarios. Like you said, maybe they recently transitioned. We know it takes about 3 years and things like that. Same thing happens with conventional. And so, yeah, Dr. David Montgomery is really good he wrote a paper on this kind of recently, I think it was 2022, isolating soil health as the most important variable to consider rather than, and often that means organic. It isn't always that. But just like, can we really evaluate the level of soil health? And then you have things like the Rodale Institute. They've kind of been doing like side by side plots and definitely clearly demonstrating that organic food does have an edge for sure, especially when we go beyond looking at just the nutrients, right? We have to also evaluate the downstream costs, right? These externalities, the chemicals, right? We have, chemicals getting in our waterways. We have, pesticides like glyphosate. We know that for some people, especially in occupational exposures, that increases the risk of cancer. There's something called Cancer Alley between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, where people believe these chemicals that we're using in agriculture are kind of congregating and creating illness. We have dead zones, right? Fertilizers, extra nutrients, 400 different dead zones throughout the world. These are all costs we have to consider rather than just looking narrowly at the different types or amounts of nutrients. And so it's a really big question, like you said, and you're right. There is some doubt, and there are a lot of companies who want to keep that doubt in your mind. But I don't think anyone can really argue the fact that we did agriculture one way for a very long time, right? We tried to work with nature. Humans have become the first people powerful enough to kind of break that and just to try and have these huge monocultures and try and add the nutrients that are missing in a more singular and kind of synthetic way. But I think they came with good intentions. I never want to demonize people. I think a lot of people sincerely believe this is the way forward. And maybe I don't have all the answers, but I do think we need to get back to working in alignment with nature and not making companies and corporations who profit from the sale of these chemicals and pesticides, not making them the people that we listen to necessarily, always having a little bit of doubt there and understanding their intentions and their motives, and it is to sell products. And so I think we need to get back to where the community is making the decisions for the community, and just where we put food sovereignty back at the forefront, and that food should be grown by the people for the people in a way that aligns with nature, because essentially we are nature.
Yeah, I think using that ancestral lens when it comes to nutrition is key, because you can look at some of the research and be like, well, why did Ansel Keys choose to look at these select countries and not others? Why is he using this methodology? Is he even publishing all of the results, or is he discarding data that doesn't fit? It's like very easy to look at that and being like, there's a lot of unknown variables here, and it doesn't align with the way humans have been eating throughout our existence. So perhaps we shouldn't take this hook, line, and sinker. We should actually consider this and then look at the other evidence that has already been published and is being published afterward, and weighting each appropriately.
Yeah, and that's the thing that never really percolates, right, to the mainstream. We all have this, we've been taught about this bias against saturated fat, but there have been like 20 reviews now that bring that saturated fat isn't the disease-causing culprit that we believed it once was. And this evidence has even been presented to members of the Dietary Guidelines Committee, and they, decided to ignore that evidence and they kind of maintain their restrictions. But yeah, it's going to take a long time to turn this ship around, because there's been a lot of investment in this. Animal products are kind of the main driver of disease in this country narrative, but I think it's crumbling. It's definitely starting to, for sure.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I still hear a lot of uh, association with between plant-based consumption and health, and conversely, animal-based consumption and dishealth, unhealth, disease. So will you break that down? Like, what are the main reasons that people ignore or avoid animal products and switch to a plant-based, which could really be anything, diet?
Yeah. I think people are really afraid because people, red meat has been demonized for a very long time. And when you look at the research, there's this healthy user bias, right? So there's these people, dietary research is so hard, right? And even these large epidemiological studies that just kind of look at what people are doing and track it over time, there are so many variables, right? Are you eating red meat as a hot dog? Are you eating red meat in a hamburger with a gluten bun, washing it down with a soda, maybe these poor quality oils? And so you'll see sometimes these relationships with red meat in America alone. then are not present in a different country, right? Where they consume red meat in a very different dietary context. And so, yes, you've seen research come out demonizing red meat, demonizing saturated fat. But what's important to understand is that that's not a consensus. There's a lot of research that runs counter to that. So I think people are genuinely just afraid. That is the narrative, right? Vegan diets are the ethical, they're the moral, they're the responsible thing to do, right? If you love the environment, that you have to be vegan. I have a friend whose daughter came home from school the other day and she's only 9 and she said there's a club and we can't be part of it if we eat meat. And so it's scary. That's my main reason for coming this direction and really pushing back against this, because I don't want what our younger generation to suffer, because the nutrients in animal products are irreplaceable and very bioavailable and have been a very important part of our evolution. And so I just think if you're alive on planet Earth, and especially in America today, you've heard animal products are destructive to your health. But again, when we look at evolution, we realize that can't be the case, right? And that we've only started having this huge increase in chronic disease rates in the last few, 100 years, few decades, and processed foods. That's the problem. And that is ultimately the problem too with this plant-based narrative, because plant-based isn't always healthy. And there are huge profit margins with these companies. You can turn plants like corn, soy into hundreds of products, right? And they have huge profit margins. And so, yeah, I think it's sad, but most people are afraid of animal products and then switch to plant-based diets. But that's why we're here, right? Just to help people understand.
Yeah. So let's unpack a couple of these. I mean, the first one that comes to mind when you say plant-based is a picture of a healthy planet and sustainability and environmentally friendly animal welfare. How is consuming animal products not actually causing a deterioration of all those?
Oh my gosh, this is so good. Okay, so we are writing a docu-series like I talked to you about. But so there are destructive and sustainable ways to raise both plants and animals. So a lot of these people who are against animal agriculture will take information and data from a feedlot or a confined animal feeding operation and then take that to represent the whole of animal agriculture, whereas that is not how we raised animals for most of history, right? It's only since like 1850, 1950 is really when feedlots started to become a thing, but only in the very last few decades, right? So that type of animal agriculture, undoubtedly destructive, right? Like I said, it ruins topsoil, huge amounts of manure, produced waste that goes into our air, goes into our waterways. Undeniable, right? Factory, and they are working on different ways to kind of mitigate those harms, but they are very environmentally damaging, right? The counter to that is regenerative agriculture, and beef raised in something like white oak pastures, right? Or these regenerative farms that we work with at Wild Pastures. And when you use animals in a highly managed way, fertilizer, they're fertilizing, because manure is fertilizer. 50% of the fertilizer used worldwide is manure. And then they're creating this explosion of life below the soil that leads to really healthy plants and animals above the soil and a really nutrient dense product. Now, the coolest part about that is when they're managed in this way, they can graze long enough to stimulate grass growth. Now, that grass acts like a straw and sucks carbon out of the air, but then they're moved. So they're not overgrazing, right? Overgrazing has historically created damage. But when they're moved in these cycles that mimic predatory prey environment, where animals and ruminants that evolved with these grasslands in a way that they would have moved, they can actually be one of our most powerful tools for sequestering carbon. A recent analysis of Qantas Labs looked at grass-fed beef raised in this farm in Bluffton, Georgia, actually sequestered 3.5 pounds of carbon for every pound of grass-fed beef produced. Now, other analysis compared that to conventional beef. I think it was 33 pounds of carbon is released. So you see, that is a huge delta. That is a very different. But then also, if you look at pork, I think it was 9 carbons or 9 pounds, and chicken is something like 6. So still releasing carbon. And then Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger were about 4.5 pounds. So it was kind of the inverse. But what I want to say is it was still, these are plant-based foods, still not as environmentally friendly as grass-fed, regeneratively raised beef. And the methane issue is kind of the same. Methane, huge issue in feedlot scenarios where there's nothing to capture the methane, but in healthy ecosystems with dung beetles and earthworms and really healthy grass and, salt licks. And there's ways you can manipulate the feed. That methane issue becomes not a problem. Then we also have on the other side, not all plants are sustainable. Not all plant production is sustainable. A lot of the soy, right, that is the basis of a lot of these plant-based foods, it's grown in monocultures, right? And these are very destructive because they kill everything that was alive on that plot of land before and grow one thing. So people think we're killing so many animals, but with animal agriculture, and that's true, but we are also killing a lot of other little animals, bunnies and insects and birds, because we're destroying their habitats and their ecosystems. And again, we're adding chemicals and fertilizers that are further degrading the environment. So animal agriculture is not always destructive and might even be one of the most powerful tools we have for improving the environment when it's done right. And plants are not always sustainable, right? They can be, all right? And we should compare things like organic agriculture, best case scenario, to regenerative agriculture for animals, or we should compare conventional plant production with feedlot scenarios and have a really balanced discussion. But that's just not what happens in the mainstream narrative, right? We're taking feedlots and we're comparing it to, an organic plant-based food. And also, there's a lot of things we can talk about when it comes to the models that are being used to kind of come up with these, plants are way better for the environment scenarios. But I think that's a good jumping off point. Yeah,
Yeah.
anything to say?
There's a lot there. And I think
Yes.
it's important to underscore what you're saying, that done properly, beef and other livestock, if they're actually raised the way they're supposed to be raised, the way they have been raised, can be a carbon sink and actually sequester more carbon from the atmosphere than they're producing. And at the same time, I'm thinking through my own consumption habits. And there's a lot of foods that I consume, such as avocados or the occasional almond. Those are water intensive, and those are certainly not contributing to regenerating the planet in any way.
No, I just read a quote the other day, and I think it was like, if you throw away overripe avocado, it's like running your shower for an hour. It's just like a very, very intense, water intensive. And then when you look at these calculations being done for animal agriculture and the amount of rainwater they use, which has been equated to something like 20 bathtubs. Rob Wolf and Diana Rogers did a great job. It's 93% of it's rain, right? And in a grass-fed scenario, like 97%. And then they also urinate that back into the soil. So it's this really cyclical nature. And then on top of that, like we were saying, when it's done correctly, animals can help improve water filtration and water holding capacity of the soil. And so it's not a true cost accounting in a lot of these models and in a lot of these like really quick memes that are just put out there. Like one burger costs 20 bathtubs of water. That's not fair. A lot of that's rainwater. A lot of that's going back. And if it's done right, it can actually help the water or the soil hold the water. So
Yeah, and there's an issue of a lot of the world's land not being not being able or capable of holding plants and growing plants anyway. It needs the livestock on it to be able to later grow plants.
yeah, I talked to Dr. Frank Mitlerner about this. Now, 2/3 of agricultural lands are unsuitable for crop production, too hilly, too rocky, too little moisture, whatever, many variables. And I followed that up with, okay, but could we rehabilitate this land and turn it into arable land? And he said two things. One is that that's a very small minority of the land because, again, we have these limiting factors, climate, water, etc. But then also that, and the more important thing is ruminants are a really great way to turn something back into arable land because again, they're these natural fertilizers and they can stimulate growth and they're, manure and all of that. They stimulate the soil biology, which creates a really healthful soil in the first place. So yeah, it's just the mainstream narrative is just so short-sighted, is just missing so many important elements.
But it does look great on a meme though.
Exactly, right? It's like meat is murder, but to explain all this, you see, I'm just talking and talking and talking. It's like there's so much nuance. And then what you also have to understand is like when they look at these models and they say, okay, per kilo or calorie or per gram of meat produced, it's a lot more energy intensive. What we have to remember is that we can't capture the value of a food in calories, right? That's what we've been talking about, right? Nutrients matter. Animal products provide nutrients that we just can't get from plants, right? DHA, vitamin B12, heme iron, taurine. There's just like plants and animals are both really, really important. And so when we just look at these models and they're based on calories, we're missing this whole bigger picture. And in fact, there has been research that looked at like essential nutrients, if we factor that in, or amino acids and we factor that in, and then the contributions of plant and animal products in terms of their environmental impact looks a lot more similar. And we also have to realize most of them don't, I haven't seen any that have factored in the bioavailability of plant foods being lower, so you'd have to eat more of them, or the fact that if you eat nose to tail rather than just the muscle meats, you can actually reduce the environmental impact of animal products in one research study by 14%. So again, just a lot of nuance that's just left out in the memes.
Yeah. And although it's true that all plant-based or all plant proteins have each of the amino acids in different proportions, a lot of times it's not optimal for human health. And it's like just minuscule proportions of a lot of the most important essential amino acids.
Yeah, there's like a threshold. There's an amount that you need in order to meet that requirement, and a lot of them are very low levels of certain, they might be present but not at that threshold that where it's actually going to give you the desired effect.
Yep. Same story with the essential fatty acids and all kinds of other nutrients that vegans and vegetarians, unfortunately, in order to get, often need to supplement.
Yes. Yes, you do. And some people just are really bad at making that conversion, right? So we want these really long chain essential fatty acids, DHA and EPA, but and you can get LA and ALA, which are the plant-based forms, but a lot of people can't make that conversion. It's a very inefficient conversion. And some people just have genetics where I've talked to people where it's just not possible for them to do it at all. And so yes, supplementing, and obviously vitamin B12 is a really important one. That's just not present in its, there's analogs, B12 analogs, but sometimes those actually make the absorption of true vitamin B12 more difficult. And there's a litany of case studies where people have gone plant-based and suffered, neurological dysfunction, mental health, psychiatric dysfunction as a result of B12 deficiency. And the thing I'm most passionate about is in kids, because of their critical windows of development, sometimes they are irreversible, even when you then add meat or supplementation back into the mix. So yeah, I think everyone has great intentions. I think we get confused, but I think we have to realize that, especially for people like children and people reproducing, that getting all of the nutrients from our plants is very, very difficult. There might be some people who are able to do it, but it won't be the majority.
That's very scary that a window of going one of these diets and completely neglecting certain nutrients can have long-term, potentially even irreversible side effects.
Yeah, it really is sad. There's case studies where, the babies made a little bit of progress, but their full potential will still never be met because of a window that they missed and a deficiency that they had.
Yeah. Hmm. One of the other things that comes up in all of these conversations and is the hardest for me to justify is the ethics and the animal cruelty that comes along with meat consumption.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, right? If we are treating our animals the way that they're often treated in feedlots, not only in just like, you know, uh, cutting beaks off and very little space to live. Obviously, those are terrible things. But also, when we feed all animals the same thing, like this ration, we take away their ability to self-medicate. Dr. Fred Provenza again talks a lot about cows and other animals will get what their body needs, and that will change. And when we don't allow them that ability, I think that's really cruel. But there's, again, a lot of people who are not doing it that way at all and just love their animals and provide a very happy, healthy life and essentially one bad day, right? Or one bad moment. But for the rest of the time, they're very happy. And like I said, there were different calculations, but we're killing a lot of sentient beings with plant-based agriculture as well. Like I said, the mice, the birds, all of these things that have to die in order for a monoculture to be made. That's a problem too, if we're looking at this from a strictly ethical standpoint. And so I know Diana Rogers has argued that eating one cow that can provide meat for a family for a year, is arguably a more ethical choice than the millions of sentient beings that are killed in order to create a monoculture to produce soy or corn or wheat. But yeah, absolutely. The humane treatment of animals is something I'm really, really passionate about myself. And there are many people who are doing it very, very well. I've actually interviewed Temple Grandin. Have you heard of Dr. Temple Grandin? Yeah. Yeah. And she's created a whole system to make sure that animals experience as little stress as possible from, the minute they're born until their last minutes.
hmm And the one thing I remind myself in this regard too is that if I am nutrient deficient and I am not operating at my full capacity, I cannot give back and make a difference to any of these causes. The chicken can't go out and fix the system for the rest of the chickens. Say neither can a cow or a pig or any of the other animals. But if a human has the right resources, we can actually go out and make differences.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I when I practiced yoga, it was this ahimsa is like non-violence, right? Which a lot of people take to mean you can't eat animals but also that violence is against yourself, like you're saying. And if you're incapable of going out and voting or becoming passionate about a subject like how we're treating animals, then you're shooting the whole effort in the foot because we need healthy, happy people. And it is hard to come to terms with the fact that our life requires death, but we are just part of this ecosystem, right? And everybody is eventually somebody's lunch. And that is a really hard pill to swallow. But it will happen to me. Like, I hope when I die that I'm planted back into a tree and that all my nutrients get to go back into the earth so I can give back to everything that I had to take in order for my life to be a thing. But I understand why it's hard to swallow, but I do think it's a reality. Um, and I don't know that we can escape it.
Yeah. Are there any other primary objections to meat that I'm missing and not thinking of?
I don't think so. I think that we've covered most of them, right? I think
Mhm.
I think we have the environmental, the health, and the ethical. Those are the main ones I've heard.
Yeah, and what I've heard you say is that the big thing to do here is do true cost accounting of both foods, the plant-based and also the animal-based. And when you do the true cost accounting, the numbers that you see on TV and memes, they might look very different than you're thinking.
Yes, and we just have to remember everybody is coming to this world with their own biases, right? Whether that's from an animal rights perspective, an environmental perspective, a religious perspective, an entrepreneurial perspective. We all have those. And so everyone whose advice you're taking, just try to understand those. And like you said, these models, right? We try and do a good job. They're very smart people who are working with these models. And yet, like the most recent one, the Food Compass rating system, created Lucky Charms and cereals as more healthful than beef and eggs. And it's just like, and these are still very smart people. And so you have to remember, just do a true cost accounting. What are they prioritizing? What are they looking at in these models? What is their agenda? Who are they working for? What are their belief systems? Like, there's just like so much you have to peel back. So really, yeah, what you have to do at the end of the day is, I think, is just, when you can, get as close to your food as you possibly can. If you can know your farmer and rancher and ask them the hard questions and experiment and kind of figure it out for yourself. But the closer that we are, I think, the better off we'll be. And I think we just have to recognize plants and animals both play a very important part in the diet. I know there's a lot of carnivores out there, and I think that's valuable too, right? A lot of vegans, but I think ideally there are nutrients from both that we can get. And so just remembering whole foods, right? If there's one food group that's causing the most disease, it's processed foods, without a doubt. Nobody can argue that. I think we just need to leave animal products alone because they're clearly what's causing the problem.
Yeah, the simple heuristic I use to think about this is whenever you're looking at a food, thinking about its nutrient content and its potential toxicity. And you compare those, and the higher it is, more towards the nutrient dense side and the less toxic, the better it's going to align with your biology. Not to say you can't eat things that are more toxic than they provide nutrients, but long term, that's going to be a losing strategy.
I love that. Such a logical Logical way to approach it. I really like it.
So far we've talked, Autumn, a lot about meat and animal-based nutrition, but I'd be remiss to not go the other way and talk about plants now and whole food-based supplements, because that is certainly one of your fortes, and I think you are more qualified than just about anyone to talk about this.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So synergy. So Royal Lee, I don't know if you're familiar with his research. A long time ago, understood, that foods in their whole form had this kind of magic or synergy, a way that all of the cofactors worked together to really magnify the impact. I think today we've become very linear and we're producing synthetic nutrients and putting them in supplemental form. And sometimes, that can be helpful. Not saying that it can't. Fortification, right? B9 fortification, folate deficiency is a problem. And I think that possibly helped. But there's also research to suggest nutrients in isolated synthetic form. A lot of them are made, like in the B vitamin scenario, from petroleum and coal tar. Again, coming into our body in an isolated and synthetic way, it is not the same. It isn't going to be utilized. Either it's kind of going to act like a drug in the body and might call upon other resources that we have in the body, right? Or simply just not work with, in like an orchestra where it would. Like vitamin C, for example. Most vitamin C is made from genetically modified corn and processed with acetone, which is an ingredient in a nail polish remover. And it's just the outer shell of the whole food vitamin C molecule that contains dozens of cofactors, right, that all work together. Now, research has shown, again, that the outcomes can be different. There was a trial in smokers where they took, I think it was 1 gram of ascorbic acid and 1 gram of whole food vitamin C in the form of camu juice. Now, only the juice was able to reduce inflammation. So we know there's something else happening in whole food vitamin C aside from the ascorbic acid that we're getting in all of these supplemental nutrients. So I think, again, supplements can be helpful. But then when you look at something like calcium supplementation has been shown in men to increase the risk of heart disease potentially. Same with B9 and B12 in a 2009 trial in Journal of American Medical Association increased the risk of cancer. And then we see same thing with fish oil, right? Fish oil, some trials show it's very beneficial. Other trials show no effect, right? We always know pretty much across the board fish is a very beneficial thing to consume. I don't think many people, there might be some people who argue that, but not a lot. But at the end of the day, it's whole foods contain a wisdom, contain a synergy, contain hundreds of bioactive like ingredients and molecules and metabolites that we don't even yet fully understand, not even by a little bit. And so I think it's always important to prioritize whole foods. You can't out supplement a bad diet. And even if you can take all the right nutrients, they won't necessarily be utilized in the same way in the body. And also selenium, right, is another one. And vitamin E is another one. There are just these instances in the literature that make you realize, okay, synthetic supplementation does not equal whole food.
And that brings us right back to the beginning of the conversation about the conflicting research, because if you're using one, you're drawing your conclusions all based on this synthetic form of a vitamin. That might be completely valid. It might not be a good vitamin to take. But then if you look at the whole foods based version of that, it's going to have completely different effects in some cases.
Absolutely. And that is, I think, the research in JAMA. I think this was the 2009 article. Now, that research project where they looked at B vitamin supplementation, they were trying to recreate the results they had seen in this more epidemiological study where they saw fruits, vegetables, B vitamin rich foods lowered the risk of disease. And they found the opposite, right? That it might potentially, in some populations, increase the risk of disease.
Exactly. Yeah. And you said dozens or hundreds of constituents within the whole foods based products, but I think it could be thousands and thousands that we'll maybe discover in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line.
Yeah. It's like at the very beginning of the 1900s, I think Casimir Funk discovered like the vital amines, I believe it was. But this is, the beginning of the 1900s, right? And we're a little bit past that, but we have so much to learn about nutrients and how they're impacting the body. So yeah, and like you said, there probably are thousands of metabolites and hopefully we'll learn more about them soon. But for the time being, I say we just hedge our bets and we prioritize food.
Yeah. The other thing I see commonly when I'm looking through these papers is that they will look at one specific isolate, one supplement they created, and they will see how it's impacting a surrogate endpoint, say cholesterol. And it's not necessarily the cholesterol that's important, it's what are you trying to accomplish by looking at cholesterol. So it's a bit harder to understand, but just changing a biomarker isn't necessarily what we're trying to do, because there might be things more upstream that are more important to fix or alter than just taking this one measurement, say blood pressure even, and bringing it up or bringing it down.
No, I think that's so important, right? And that is like cholesterol is one good example. Like, what does it do to your LDL when you adjust that for mortality? Say in the context of like saturated fat, that's a very different outcome, right? It doesn't necessarily show a benefit for the thing we really care about, even though it might reduce cholesterol, right? And the same thing for vitamin C. I see a lot of people arguing that, oh, well, the bioavailable, like its absorption, it's utilized to the same extent, it's absorbed to the same extent. But if we again take that downstream a little bit, but does it reduce inflammation? Then how is it utilized in the body? Is there a different endpoint? Mood, fatigue, there's so many other really important criteria that are often left out. And I get it, research is hard, right? We don't have researchers who can sit around and follow us all day long and, oh, how are you feeling now? And do you know what I mean? So, but at the same time, yeah, it's important to realize that surrogate endpoints are not always the thing that really matters.
So based on that, and based on the fact that I know you have a bunch of whole foods based products, which of the products and the ingredients have you the most excited? For example, I know that you are a big fan of turmeric and of apple cider vinegar. What else?
Oh
And
gosh.
why?
So I talked to this guy named Dr. Agarwal, and he did like decades of research on turmeric. And this is a quote from him. He said there wasn't a cancer that he couldn't find that turmeric couldn't kill. Now, we often look at just curcumin. We see a lot of these supplements, just curcumin. But again, that is one isolated compound, really cool, potent, powerful one, but not the only one. And then certain trials have shown when you take it out, curcumin free turmeric sometimes is as powerful, right? So it just speaks to there are still other elements in this turmeric that are really, really important. Another thing I love about, I just want to apple cider vinegar. I worked with, I think her name was Dr. Carol Johnson, just did a research project to show that it seemed to simple taking of apple cider vinegar reduce depression in college students. That's awesome, right? College is really hard. And if you can take something super simple, make you feel better. And then I'm also really looking into lion's mane lately. Now, I don't know if you know that a lot of mushroom supplements on the market are just, they're very grain heavy. Yeah, because a lot of them there's three kind of cycles to a mushroom life. There's, spore, germination. Then there's something called the mycelium, which is like the root structure, and it's often grown on a substrate like rice or oats, but they can't separate the substrate. And so that's 50%, of the product could be just grain. So essentially you're watering down the more active compounds. Now, lion's mane is really cool. I'm obsessed with brain health. That's always been my weak link. And it's been shown to actually reverse mild cognitive decline in a 2009 trial by Mori. So I love that. They believe, it at least partially attributable to its ability to improve nerve growth factor. And so other elements of brain health. I'm trying to think, vitamin C, I'm just obsessed with because it's for so much more than just the immune system. And also bone broth. Bone broth is super cool, right?
Yes.
And collagen.
Yeah.
So I was reading this article the other day and it looked at, we're often approaching skin health from the external, right? We can slather on the potions and the creams, but this one looked at things like hyaluronic acid and zinc and coenzyme Q10 and all of these other more like oral supplementation for skin health. They found the only supplement that had good evidence in 24 randomized controlled trials was collagen protein. And so, and again, after the age of 20, we lose about 1% of our skin collagen every year. And so by 50, we've lost 25%. By 75, we lost about 50% of our collagen. And so putting bone broth and this nose to tail eating and collagen back into the equation is, obviously for skin health, it can be helpful, but also some people believe for even the mitigation of heart disease risk and things like that, and makes you sleep better. Glycine's a really powerful neurotransmitter. So, gosh, I mean, you shouldn't have asked me that question. There's so many things I'm really excited about, but that's just a brief list.
It's so funny. I had no idea we were going to talk about this. And this morning I had apple cider vinegar and a lemon in my water. And then I had collagen and lion's mane in my coffee this morning. And it was the lion's mane with the fruiting body rather than the mycelium.
Perfect. See? Look at that. Yeah, we're on the same wavelength. That's exactly what my morning routine is too. Our collagen bone broth and the neuro effect and the apple cider vinegar and often the vitamin C too. So
Yeah, and bone broth protein is much more rare than whey and the plant-based proteins. Why'd you choose bone broth protein for your shakes?
such an important question. So I always think like every protein has a unique amino acid profile. So amino acids are just the breakdown products and different amino acids have different superpowers, right? So glycine is one of the most prevalent in bone broth. Really exciting to me, right? Because people believe that and it isn't, it's not an essential amino acid because we can make it, but the amount that we make isn't necessarily it doesn't mean it's the amount we need, right? We don't have this kind of like metabolic switch that increases our glycine production. So some people believe we need like 10 grams more in order to have, healthy hair, skin, and nails. Also, like I said, it works powerfully on the brain. It's kind of like it has a calming effect that we all desperately need. And it also has been found to just improve the quality of our sleep. And again, that eating nose to tail, a lot of us are eating methionine and these more muscle meat based proteins. But we need to counterbalance that with the glycine, which has been shown to have positive impacts. And so we also sell away. I think, there's a lot of really great protein sources, but you need to look at what are the primary amino acids that you're getting and what benefits are you looking for. If you want to whey, like if you want to build more muscle, branched chain amino acids, leucine, all of this, like whey can be a really great way to do that. If you want to improve the health of your hair, your skin, your nails, your cartilage, your bones, that's more of a bone broth cell protein. So it depends on what you're looking for.
And also, I think the timing that you use it because glycine is great for sleep. So this would be perfect before bed. And then also something like whey will increase levels of a neurotransmitter called orexin. And that is stimulating and wakefulness promoting. So if you take that before bed, as I've sometimes experienced, you might no longer feel all that sleepy.
Yes. No, whey is what I often have before or right after my workouts, because of that very reason. Yeah, it does put a little pep in your step and it helps build that muscle. So beautifully stated.
One thing that you added to your whey protein, I believe it is an ingredient called colostrum. What is that and why did you add it?
Yeah, so colostrum is called like liquid gold, right? If anyone's had a baby, they know that milk that comes out first is like they say babies who, people who live to 100, some of them have had like the double dose of colostrum or whatever. It is full of like immunomodulatory and immunosupportive compounds. And so many of us are struggling with our immune health. And who is actually accessing colostrum? I mean, like not very many people are consuming it at all a lot. And so there's been research to suggest it improves leaky gut and just overall immune health. And so we wanted to find a way to get that into just a protein powder that someone might be able to take on the regular as a way just to, again, improve the health of our immune system, because the health of our immune system is the health of our whole body. And the thing that some people have objections to, well, why would we take the colostrum away from the cows? But here's the thing, we don't. Like they make sure that their young get the colostrum and then they'll just take the colostrum in between feedings, but we'll never be sacrificing the health of the babies so that we can have a product that is definitely not what's happening. But colostrum is very powerful. If you've ever worked with like a gut healing practitioner, it's one of the first things that people come in with. It is very, very helpful, like I said, for leaky gut. And most supplements I found might be organic, but they weren't necessarily grass-fed and grass-finished. And so we wanted to create a really high-quality product that was both of those things.
When I was digging into my research, it seems like colostrum is like nature's anabolic steroids, but like toned down a bunch of notches, or human growth hormone. It's like it has so many diverse, like really cool and profound, like body modulating effects.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, the literature on colostrum is pretty significant, and it just like all of it's showing, like you said, many different immune supportive peptides or other immune modulating factors that we don't probably even fully understand yet. But the research is pretty clear. It can be very, very beneficial.
Yeah, like it's for gut. And then also, I think I saw something about comparing it head to head with medication or vaccinations for flu, and it actually did very well in comparison.
Yeah, you know what? I'm vaguely familiar with that. I think I've read that as well. But yeah, it is a very, very powerful substance and something I know practitioners have been using for a very long time. When I went through my training program for all the gut health, for functional diagnostic nutrition, it was definitely one of the first tools that we'd access when anybody had any sort of gut dysfunction.
Before Paleo Valley, I found a brand that is very commonly recommended. It's a liquid. It would just go in the fridge, and I'd often forget to use it. But then I also never checked to see if it was grass fed. And now that you mention it, I'm wondering what you'd be getting out of conventional colostrum.
And that's the thing. I don't know. Like you just don't, it's just a little less quality controlled. And so animals can be given hormones, right? They might have pesticides that they're inhaling or that they're treated with, or, you just it's harder to say, right? So I can't make any claims about what's happening in a different colostrum product because I haven't tested that. But what I can say is ours comes from grass-fed and finished animals that don't receive hormones or antibiotics, and so it would be a very, very clean source.
Mhm. Autumn, will you give me the rundown on how all of your companies and your products fit together? Because when I first met you, I was surprised and impressed that you guys use whole animal utilization and your products across different companies seem to perfectly complement each other.
Yeah, so well, that a lot of them were created because we had extra meat. For example, our Wild Pastures Burger Company. Well, first, of course, whole animal utilization, like I said, is very important. So we take the bones and we make our bone broth, and we're creating a facility just to do that. And we take our organ complex, and that comes from the organs from the animals, right? And then, of course, we have our sister company, Wild Pastures, all the cuts from the animal, right? We have steaks and just, like chicken wings, and this is pork, chicken, and beef, and even wild caught seafood. And so every part of the animal is used. And then we have our Wild Pastures Burger Company. So we have, as you'll see when you like really consider how an animal's used, there's a lot of ground beef, right? There's a lot of ground beef. And so we put the ground beef into the burger company. So we have a burger restaurant in Boulder called Wild Pastures Burger Company. And then the tallow, which is the fat of the animal, that's used to cook our French fries. McDonald's even used to use tallow. It's a very stable cooking fat. And so, yeah, we use, the bones, we use the organs, we use the fat, we use the ground beef, and then we use all of the other parts of the animal as well. And we are also working on a dog food line. So we'll have an additional outlet for organ meats and these just other bits of the animal that a lot of people don't want as frequently, but that animals like dogs love.
Sounds like I might want to mix that into my ground beef.
You can totally do it. We'll let you know when it's finished for sure. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have been using wild pastures for all my beef or not even just beef, all my meat for a long time. I did some research a while back into all of the top and popular meat delivery services. And then I came across wild pastures and I was surprised by the whole animal utilization side. But then, most importantly to most consumers, myself included, unfortunately, was the price. Like somehow you guys are able to beat the price of my local Trader Joe's, my Whole Foods, the HEB here in Texas. And the taste is also at least two or three notches above any of those. So, how are you able to pull this off?
Oh, I love that you said that. Yeah, the flavor is definitely very unique. And we average about $9 a pound across all cuts, right? So that's steaks and beef. And if you go to Whole Foods, you're going to pay, $11 for a pound of ground beef. And so the way that we accomplish that is exactly what we were just talking about. No part of the animal is ever going to waste, first of all, right? We're finding a stream or somewhere to put it that we can still, supply that product and make money off of it. But also, we're cutting out the middleman. So we are just putting you in direct contact with a regenerative farmer that is in America. And a lot of these other meat delivery services, they are importing. right? So not only is that less environmentally sustainable, that's more expensive to ship and, bring everything across the country. But yeah, when we're trying to create more, local domestic supplies and just take out that middleman, this grocery store who is upcharging everything, right? Putting an additional cost on that. We're able to keep the cost way down. And when possible, we do local deliveries. So, right. So we have our own trucks, and we're our recyclable packaging and we're delivering it directly to the people, which is again cutting out the cost of shipping and freight, which can be exorbitant. So yeah, using the whole animal, connecting you directly to the farmer, and then using, local delivery, recyclable packaging whenever possible is the way we've done it so far. I'm glad you recognize it because it's like 40% less than other meat delivery services, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's the Amazon model, like, of last mile delivery.
Yes. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and my little trick there was I would always maximize the amount of ground beef I get in each order because I love ground beef, and also I think the ground beef is fairly affordable at, like, $6 a pound on average, somewhere around that, so that is much better. That's actually cheaper than I can get anywhere around, and it's higher quality grass-fed, grass-finished beef as well.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that makes us unique is all of our producers are American, obviously, and then they're using regenerative practices. So grass-fed is not always grass-fed, right? In 2016, they stopped regulating the term, so you can have grass-fed, which all cows are grass-fed in the beginning of their life, and then grain finished. And even above and beyond that, right? Are they using practices that are actively restoring environmental health and ecosystem health? And our producers are. So it's a net win for the animals, a net win for the people because they're getting a really nutrient dense, high quality product, and and a win for the planet as well because we're not importing and we're actively repairing the ecosystem.
Mhm. My last order, I got a pound or 2 of liver from you guys as well, and so I last time I cooked liver was a nightmare, and it was terrible. I couldn't even finish the half pound I cooked or whatever it was. I had, like, 3 bites, and that was more than enough, and I'm glad I didn't because I'm sure that's too much liver to be consuming in one meal anyway, but I'm looking forward to giving it a go with a much better recipe and certainly will not overcook it this time.
Yeah, and you know what? Some people say to soak it in milk ahead of time. It kind of takes the flavor down a few notches, but that is ultimately why I created the organ complex because I don't eat liver. But honestly, a lot of people were really requesting it. That liver we added because so many people wanted it. So there's got to be ways to prepare it that are palatable. I just don't know that yet, but I'll find out for you and I'll send them your way for
Why
sure.
did you choose each of the different forms of organ meat in the liver complex, or not liver complex, the organ complex?
Ooh, the heart, liver, and kidney? Yeah, so liver is like I'm sure that your listeners are aware, but it's nature's multivitamin. It's been shown to cure pernicious anemia. 3 scientists won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1934. Not Nobel Peace Prize, just Nobel Prize, for that finding. It also contains an unidentified anti-fatigue factor that there was research in the 1950s that demonstrated that. So liver was just a shoo-in. Is the most powerful, potent source of vitamin A and B12 that you'll find. Organ meats are also the most nutrient dense foods on the planet, right? So, um, Ty Beal did this research. And when you look at the nutrients most people are deficient in, liver, heart, liver, kidney, and spleen were 3 or 4 of the top 7 foods. So liver was a shoe in, right? Then heart. We have heart that's really rich in something called coenzyme Q10. And that is a very heart, like it's an antioxidant, but it's also believed to be very supportive of heart health. Some people believe heart disease is actually a lack of coenzyme Q10. So heart's a great source of that. And then kidney is a great source of selenium. Every different organ has different nutrients. And according to conventional wisdom, the nutrients that are required for that organ congregate. It's like a reservoir for those particular nutrients. And so we wanted a diversity. And again, I don't think eating the same thing over and over and over again is the best way to go. So if we can get a diversity of nutrients and a diversity of inputs and a diversity of nutrients, I think that's the best way to go.
Yeah, and I interviewed Phil Mikens recently about bioregulator peptides, and we were talking about the natural source of them is within the organ itself, and these are small strings of amino acids that flip on and off epigenetic expression, basically that activate or deactivate certain parts of your DNA, and they improve the function of certain organs and bodily systems. So if instead of wanting to go down that route and use those specific products, you can just use more organ meats or consume more organ meats.
You have to tell me about this man. I don't know. I've never heard. Need to read. Can't wait to listen. So please send me that podcast because yeah, food is just amazing, like you said, and we will constantly be continuing to uncover all of these different types of benefits of food.
Mm-hmm. And the other question I had for you, as I've been using your wild caught fish roe, why
Mm.
did you choose to encapsulate fish roe? I think it's like freeze dried powder as opposed to what most companies do, and that's just have soft gels full of fish. I don't even know what it is.
Fish
Fish
oil.
liquid that, yeah, fish oil, fish liquid, whatever it actually is, that is often rancid by the time it gets to you.
Yeah, that's the thing. Because fish oil again it's kind of it's isolated, right? It's an isolated product, and yeah, a lot of them do have rancidity associated with them, right? Oils, especially when they're high in fragile fats, polyunsaturated fats like omega 3s, they go rancid pretty quickly. Heat and just exposure to air, and on and on. And so we wanted to kind of not do an isolated form, but what have indigenous cultures used? Fish eggs are one of them, right? And so they contain not only DHA and EPA, but they contain protein, selenium, vitamin E. They have, again, this confluence of nutrients and minerals, and they're gently freeze dried rather than being exposed to high levels of heat and processing. And so, yeah, when we tested the levels of oxidation, they're a lot lower than you would find in a conventional fish oil. So if you're taking a fish oil and it's rancid, that's just adding to the body burden, right? And so we wanted to find a very natural, not isolated way to support health. And that's, yeah, our fish roe is one of my favorites for sure. I actually had someone tell me the other day they had tennis elbow for, like a year, and they took it for a week and they could already feel the difference. So
That's one thing I was going to ask about that, because like with normal fish oil, I'm used to like looking at the total omega 3s. I'm looking at the DHA, the EPA. It's different when it's a freeze dried powder. So how do I go about determining the right dose for me?
I love that question, right? And we don't standardize it. So every batch is a little bit different. But what I can tell you is there has been research to suggest a smaller amount of DHA and EPA from a whole food source like salmon. You require far lower levels to obtain the same levels in your blood as you would something that is isolated like a fish oil. So I think it was like 3 times the EPA and 9 times the DHA of the isolated fish oil to achieve the same blood levels as a whole food source. And so, yeah, we can't make any claims around the specific amounts you're going to receive. But again, the body generally is able to use a whole food source in more efficiently. And so that doesn't mean you're not going to get the same bang for your buck.
Well, I didn't even mean to do that, but we just circled back to the very beginning and the importance of whole foods based supplements. And we've been going for an hour and a quarter already. So we'll start to wind this one down. But if people are interested in finding you online, finding Paleovalley, your restaurant, Wild Pastures, or any of your future companies, how do they go about that?
Yeah, you can always email me directly at autumn@paleovalley.com. But then also paleovalley.com is the supplement side of things. Wildpastures.com is the meat delivery service from American Regenerative Farmers. And Wild Pastures Burger Co. is the burger company. And so any of those channels, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, working on the TikTok. We're not, moving in that direction. I'm just not sure about it yet, but any of those channels will work.
Well, you're faster than I am at getting onto TikTok.
Yeah, it's a big one. I mean, my son just is like, that's where the action's at, Mom. But I'm too old, I think.
Yeah. All right, Autumn, I got a couple more questions for you before we will call it a day.
Okay.
If there was a worldwide burning of the books and all knowledge on Earth was lost, which 3 resources would you keep and why?
I love this. This is good. I'd say I would want to keep Alan Savory's work. I think we need his work to restore ecosystems. I would say Weston Price. I think he really captured what we need to do with food. Stay away from the processed foods. And then it's so personal, and I don't even think she's like on most people's radar, but her name's Eli Harwood. Have you heard of her?
Mm-mm.
and she works at creating connection with your kids, like creating cooperation through connection rather than control. And every day I see her content, and it just sets me up to be the kind of parent that I think this world needs, because I do think that we're all struggling for connection and just like outlets for authentic feelings and understanding ourselves and being truly supportive of our children and who they might become. So
I love that. All right, we will do a quick rapid fire round now, starting with the biggest myths that you've heard around nutrition that bother you.
It's, I think, just calories in, calories out. I think we can demonstrate that. That's annoying. That meat is a destroyer of health. That one bothers me. And that vegan is the most morally and respectable and the healthiest possible diet.
Good recap.
Yeah.
What area of your own health or performance are you currently focusing on?
Yes. Somatic therapy. Have you heard of it?
I have.
Yeah. It's so important. I mean, I made such groundbreaking progress just tuning in my diet and, with therapy, but actually learning to listen to the feedback from my body and like drop in, it's just a whole nother level. And it's something I had no idea how to do before this year. And it's improving my sleep. It's improving my relationships to myself primarily. Really powerful, highly recommended.
Mm. Well, along the same lines, are there any topics outside of that that currently have you fascinated or you're researching?
Ooh, well, I'm writing my dissertation right now, so there isn't a lot of other research happening, but that is on how the nutrient profile changes in regards to the agriculture and production practices, and whether or not regenerative agriculture actually improves not only the ecosystem, but, parameters of human health. So really interested. Just want to share this quick trial. There's a trial in 2010 where they looked at wild meat versus CAFO raised meat, factory feedlot meat, and then looked at inflammation in the body after. And they found that when you ate wild meat, your levels of inflammation were lower than when you ate meat from a CAFO. But anyway, I am fascinated by whether or not regenerative agriculture benefits human health in a very direct way. And all my time right now is going to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly have a bias hoping that you find positive results, but I will keep an open mind in case you don't.
Yes. I mean, you have to, right? I'm going into it hoping the same thing, but you never know. But even whatever we find out, still an important stepping stone, right? It's just, yeah.
Exactly. Well, Autumn, what is something that the Paleovalley and Wild Pastures tribes don't know about you?
Paleovalley Wild Pastures tribes don't know about me. Probably that I was a really bad kid. I was a really problematic child. And so I just say that to say, now I'm really focused on helping other people. In my younger days, I was just managing. And maybe most people know that, but I was a real pill, like from the time I came out. So I don't know. There's hope for everyone. It's all going to be okay. And just like, it's not always the end of the story.
Well, I've been told that I was a very problematic child also. So hopefully that my trajectory will be similar to yours.
Well, it already is. Yeah, you're trying to make a difference. That's all I can ask, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Autumn, how would you like to wrap this episode up today?
Oh, just say thank you. You've made a really, really fun conversation, and I just appreciate the work you're doing and just letting me be here and just telling people, it can be overwhelming, but every small step that you take is enough, and it's, it's going to create new habits and going to create positive change. So just I always say, how do you eat an elephant? Just one bite at a time, right? Just one bite at a time.
Well, Autumn, it's been a pleasure hosting you today. I'm hoping to do a round 2 with you at some point down the line. We can talk more about specific ingredients you come across, new practices, life-changing technologies, you name it.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
My name is Nick Urban, here with Autumn Smith, signing out from mindbodypeak.com. Have a great week and be an outlier. I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. I love knowing who's in the 1% committed to reaching their full potential. Comment 1% below so that I know who you are. For all the resources and links, meet me on my website at mindbodypeak.com. superpowers.com. I appreciate you and look forward to connecting with you. As a reminder, the information depicted in this video is for information purposes only. Please consult your primary healthcare professional before making any lifestyle changes.